Hello? Hello? Hey, way to go, it works.
All right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming to the first University of Texas Energy Symposium, sponsored by the Energy Institute. And we have a special one today that is co-sponsored by the K. Bailey Hutchinson Center for Energy Law and Business and the Macomb School. So I will not be introducing our speaker here today. I will pass off now to John Butler of the KBH Center, and to remind the students taking the class to sign in before you leave. And now I'll pass it over to Dr. John Butler. So thank you very much for co-sponsoring the event, and looking forward to it.
Thanks, Gary. As Gary said, you can tell how important someone is by how many people it takes to introduce them. So, Jeff, you're very important. No, I wanted to thank Carrie in particular for letting us co-sponsor this. It's nice when we're able to bring in talent from industry and find good places to plug them in around campus. So thank you and the Energy Institute. I want to thank Jeff and Phillips 66 for sponsoring lots of our energy activities. So if you attend any of the KBH Distinguished Lecture Series this semester or the KBH Annual Symposium, be sure to thank Phillips 66. That's been very helpful. And when we invited Jeff, he said, I really don't want to make a presentation as much as I'd like to have a discussion. And so they suggested that I would have the discussion, and I quickly pivoted and said, no, I've got the guy for you. So Jorge Piñon is going to lead the discussion. And Jorge is here, has many hats that he wears. He does a lot for us in Mexico, but he's here today as the director of the Latin America and Caribbean Energy Program at the Center for International and Environmental Policy, or CEEP as we call it. And so Jorge, thanks again for agreeing to come and help with the discussion. Jeff, thank you. I'll give this to Jenny. You guys are green. All right, thanks for coming.
Thank you, John. The reason that John passed the baton out to me, because I'm a downstream oil and gas guy. I'm not an engineer, I'm an economist, and began my career with Shale in the refining business. So, which is one of the topics I'm sure that we're going to go into, that refining midstream and downstream business. So I have 34 years of history with Shale, went to Amoco, and then ended up my career with BP after the merger. And so I'm sure we'll have a good conversation here. Jeff is Vice President for Investor Relations for Phillips 66, and he has over 30 years of experience in the oil and gas industry. Before joining Phillips, Jeff was Managing Director of Research at Simons & Company International, a firm that provided investment banking service for the energy industry based in Houston, right?
Yes.
And prior to that, he did a lot of research and coverage for oil companies, gas gathering companies, processing and pipeline, and independent power sectors. He served in business development, finance, and marketing roles at Texaco, Aquila, Oryx Energy, as well as a drilling engineer at Virsing and Cochrane. He holds a bachelor's degree in petroleum engineering from University of Oklahoma. I'm sorry, I was probably doing that. But the good news is that he has an MBA from UT Austin. Jeff, I don't know how many people here know about Phillips 66 and how in 2002 it came about of the merger between Conoco and Phillips. And then in 2012, Conoco spin off its downstream business into Phillips 66. Can you tell us about Phillips 66 today, what it is, where it's going, your strategy, and the merger and so on a little bit?
Very good. Very good, yes. I guess most of you were born, but not very old, during the super major when ExxonMobil came together, BP Amoco came together, and Conoco and Phillips came together. And so it was a time when they were working cost out of the system, and they were integrated companies that got larger, got more global in scope. And when you fast forward to 2012, the upstream was really the place to be. And so Conoco Phillips became the upstream company, and the refining, the marketing, the chemicals, the midstream business was spun out and called Phillips 66 again. And so Phillips 66, the new Phillips 66 really started in 2012. We've been very successful in those areas. We've actually outperformed ConocoPhillips pretty substantially since 2012, as well as the S&P 500 and all our peers. So it's been a very successful spin out. We're a manufacturing and logistics company. We're not a producer. And so that's really our main lines of business. We're very focused on our strategy. The first thing that we talk about, and did you want to hit a safety moment?
We talked about it that those of us that have oil history experience or years, and are here at UT, try to go ahead and start with the safety moment. So I told Jeff, I said, you know, the first thing he said, fantastic, and I forgot about it. So there are 2 exits, and there's no planned emergency today that we know of. And the shortest exit is when you walk out, you walk on to your right, and just outside of this building will be the muster point for us. For those of you that are at UT, we have this year for the first time a safety wallet handout that comes out of our security folks. So get it. It's a little booklet. You can put it in your wallet. It gives you instructions on what to do on certain emergency situations. It's new this year, so I will encourage you guys to please find it, get it, and have it in your wallet. Thanks for the reminder.
All right. So our strategy has 5 pillars, and the first pillar is operating excellence. Safety, reliability, environmental stewardship. We focus on those efforts. Anytime you're dealing with substantial temperatures and pressures, there's not room for error. And so we want everyone going home safely every day. Phillips 66 has been recognized for our safety record. We've got the lowest safety incidents of anyone in our industry. Our industry has fewer safety events than other industrial activities. And so this is something the industry is very focused on. The American Fuel and Petrochemical organization gives a safety honor to the best facility every year. Phillips 66 has won that award each of the last 3 years. They also recognize the top 5% of the industry. Of that top 5%, 40% of the facilities are Phillips 66 facilities, and we only represent about 3% of the eligible facilities. So that's something that's very important to us. The second thing is our people. And we strive to be and are a high-performing organization. We bring in the top people out of universities, and the University of Texas is a very important one for us. Then we build capabilities, we invest in our people. We have a number of energy resource groups or employee research groups that strive to find mentors and for new employees. I've got a Cherokee heritage, and I'm the champion for the Native American group. And so there's executive leadership people that are champions for each of these groups, and about 30% of our employees participate. So those are very valuable. Thirdly is growth. It's important to us to continue to grow. We invest in our midstream and chemical businesses because those are the businesses that are growing the most rapidly. The chemical business, chemical demand grows at about 1.3, 1.4 times EBITDA, of GDP. So it grows faster than the overall economy, and that's a business we're investing in. The second business we invest in is midstream. And with U.S. shale growth occurring at a very rapid pace, We need logistics, gathering, processing, pipeline, export facilities, and that falls in our midstream business. So we've got a growth business that benefits from the shale boom. The fourth is returns. The refining business is not growing as rapidly. When you look at gasoline, diesel, they grow at about half the pace of global GDP growth. So there's not a need for a lot of new capacity there. We're investing to improve safety, to improve reliability, to improve profitability, and ultimately returns in that business. It's a cash flow generating business that we use that cash flow to reinvest in our growth businesses. Finally, the fifth pillar of the strategy is returning cash to shareholders. We've been growing our dividend at almost a 30% rate since compounded annual growth rate since the spin in 2012. We've talked about growing it at a 10% pace this year and next as well. So dividend is a piece of it. The other thing is buying back stock. And we have been giving back or spending growth capital and buying back stock in similar amounts. And so we're returning stock or cash to shareholders. For the finance people in the room, you may know that if you look at the S&P 500, the vast majority of the returns come through dividends. And so that's very important to us. If you look at the energy sector as a whole, it's been reinvesting over 100% of its free cash flow in the business. And so when we talk about our investments, we reinvest 60% of our free cash flow, and we return 40% of our free cash flow back to shareholders. And so it's a very different model. If you've looked at share prices in the energy space recently, you can see the refiners and ourselves have done much better this year than the overall energy space, and that's a lot of the reason why. I think finally in opening, I'd say that our culture is hugely important to us. Our values are safety, honor, commitment. We've talked about the safety piece already. Honor is coming to work, being honest, having integrity, and knowing that the rest of the organization is going to value that as well. So those are important things. I think when you look at our mission is to provide energy, and if you look globally, there's about 7.7 billion people in the world. About 1.5 billion of those people don't have access to energy. Over 1 billion incrementally, the access is only for a couple of hours a day where they may have electricity. These people are burning cow dung in their house. They're burning coal in their house. This is not a healthy way to live. And so we're very focused on making affordable energy available broadly to those that aren't currently receiving it. So with that, I'd open...
By the way, if anybody, what we were planning to do is actually have a conversation. And the conversation is not only between the two of us, the conversation is also with all of you. So I'm sure there will be time at the end of our talk for you to ask questions, but please feel free, if you hear something, raise your hand, we'll bring a microphone to you so we can really have a conversation not only between the two of us, but with all of you here in the room.
If I could ask a question, how many engineering majors do we have? All right. How many business people? All right, good. How many economists? Very good. Other major degrees? Public affairs, good. Okay, so very, very good diversity in the crowd. Okay.
We were talking about how you guys in today's world have to be flexible. I'm an economist, and Shell came on campus to interview, and by sheer luck, I ran into the recruiter for Shell, not having an appointment with him. And within 2 weeks, after a couple of beers with the recruiter, that was the interview, I had a job with Shale and went to New Orleans. Never had the slightest idea that I was going to work in the oil business. So you have to be flexible. We're talking about that in today's world. And by the way, that was the first year that Shell began hiring 5% of their entry class non-engineers, because their idea was there are too many engineers. We wanted to bring in folks from, again, economics, liberal arts, humanities, and put them within to work with the engineers, and that's how I began my career. So let's talk about the business.
I might just give a quick background.
Okay.
I grew up in a small town that was an oil field town, and I had the choice of, taking a summer job at McDonald's for $3 an hour or working in an oil field for more than double that. And I thought, well, this isn't very hard. And so I went to school at OU to study petroleum engineering because I was working on drilling rigs. And you could be a drilling engineer, a production engineer, or a reservoir engineer. That was the scope of my world when I was in college. And I started out as a drilling engineer. It was during one of these recessionary periods when it looked like, gosh, Jeff, you might better know how to do something other than drill oil wells. So I went back and got an MBA. That business and engineering background made me ideal for business development, for M&A activity, and lo and behold, M&A got to be a very important thing in the industry. I had no idea that's what I was going to be doing, but the opportunity came, and you have to be open to do things that you may not expect you're going to do, and opportunities that you're not expecting, because I can assure you they'll develop during your career.
That experience between business and the science and the technical part, it's extremely important. I was lucky enough that the technical part I learned in the business, but that combination, it's awesome. Refining is a margin business. Doesn't mean that there is no volatility in the margin in the refining business. Pipeline is a fee-based business. You charge a fee and you move product. Again, it doesn't mean that you have to manage your business. One of the things that happened to us here in the U.S. since 2005 was, of course, the shale revolution and fracking. From 5,000 barrels a day, we're now at 12,000 barrels a day. Add to that another 4,000 barrels a day of liquids, of your NGLs, your propanes, which is fantastic for your chemical business. Yes. So really, there has been a revolution in the downstream side of the business, not only in the upstream side of the business. How has that impacted not only your business today, but your long-term strategy?
Yes. So even though we don't participate in the upstream, in the production side of the equation, we process crudes. And the growth of shale crudes, the growth of Canadian crudes as well, our refineries are in close proximity to where the production growth is occurring. The crude prices of U.S. and Canadian crudes are lower priced than the international markets, so that creates an advantage for our refining system. We're highly complex and can take different types of crudes, different qualities of crudes, and make clean products like gasoline, diesel, jet fuel. So the lower feedstock cost has been an advantage for our refining segment. In addition, cash operating cost, about 40% of your cash operating cost is fuel, and natural gas prices are substantially lower in the U.S. than they are internationally, and that translates into about $1.50 a barrel benefit, lower cash operating cost than the international facilities. So when you're making an $8-9 a barrel gross margin, $1.50 a barrel lower cash operating cost is substantial. So the refining business has been a substantial beneficiary. Within the midstream business, we have crude and natural gas liquids pipelines in the Permian Basin that bring Permian crude to the U.S. Gulf Coast. We are in the process of building a pipeline from the Rocky Mountains into Cushing, and then from Cushing, Oklahoma, down to the Gulf Coast. We've got a pipeline, the Bakken pipeline out of the Bakken in South Dakota, which has been a prolific field as well, that brings crude down to Beaumont, where we have storage and an export facility. We also have pipelines that connect it with our refineries along the Gulf Coast. So midstream, very big beneficiary of shale growth as well. And then finally, chemicals. We are primarily a ethane feedstock chemical facility. Our facilities are on the U.S. Gulf Coast and in the Middle East. The common thing about those two locations is that you have the lowest feedstock cost anywhere in the world. And so
They're fractionators that you're building, correct?
and we're building fractionators to split out the propane, butane, and natural gasolines. We also have export facilities because our feedstocks are cheaper than anywhere else in the world. So we're exporting crude, refined products, and natural gas liquids and taking advantage of that arbitrage.
They don't own the feedstock. You buy the feedstock in the open market. So again, you manage that margin.
Right.
That's your business.
And so really, within the chemicals business, ethane is the low-cost feedstock. Typically, propane and butane, which are NGLs as well, are the next. The highest cost feedstock is naphtha, and naphtha comes predominantly out of refineries. And naphtha prices typically follow crude. And so if you think about the cost curve for chemicals, naphtha is the highest cost and ethane is the lowest cost. And the difference between the cost of chemicals priced at naphtha and ethane is our margin. So we have the highest margin chemical plants in the world.
You also are international. You're not only in the U.S., but you also have international assets, correct?
We do. We have refineries in the UK. We have, I believe, the most profitable refinery in the UK. We also have a refinery in Germany. And we have marketing and commercial capabilities across Europe. We have offices in Asia as well, so we're selling crude, refined products, and LPGs, NGLs in Asia also.
They've been running the refineries over 90% of capacity. In fact, that's the history in the Gulf Coast today. And I don't know if you guys know, but for the first time since a long time, the U.S. is a net exporter of refined products. So about 3 million barrels a day leave PADD 3, which is the U.S. Gulf Coast, mostly to Latin America. Huge deficit of products in Latin America. So the U.S. refining business has actually become Latin America's de facto refiners. So they're not only going to benefit from small growth that we're having here in the U.S., but they're going to benefit because of their exporting capability, particularly to Latin America. Not only net gasoline, but also clean products. Right. Latin America doesn't have that conversion capacity to produce, so that gives you a huge advantage too.
That's right. One thing that we're going through now is fuel specification changes in the marine fuel market. Right. And if you look at U.S. gasoline, the sulfur content is 10 parts per million. If you look at diesel, the U.S. is 15 parts per million. Marine fuel today is 35,000 parts per million. And it's going to 5,000 parts per million on January 1st. Right. Still substantial sulfur content. But if you look at global sulfur emissions, over 90% of transportation fuel sulfur emissions are in the marine fuels. And they're only 4 million barrels a day out of a 100 million barrel a day market, and yet it's not over 90% of the sulfur emissions. So this is a huge opportunity for the industry to reduce emissions, reduce its emissions footprint, and help clean air globally. And so this is a big event that's happening January 1st of this year. We're in the process of converting our tanks now from the 3.5% sulfur fuel to the new compliant fuel. And it's likely that sulfur content will come down again at some point in the future.
Remember, in refining, it's not only refining capacity, but it's the capacity of conversion to take that dirty oil, let's say, whether it's Venezuelan or heavy Maya, and turn it into clean products. Even though today, at least production here in the U.S. is mostly light, sweet crude that's coming now on stream, but Canadian is heavy sour that you're getting, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And many of the Latin American refineries, as you know, are designed to refine heavy crude and then take high sulfur fuel oil and ship it to the U.S. for further refining. And that is not going to be a profitable exercise next year.
For the business guys, talk a little bit about your master limited partnerships, which is the model under which you run basically your midstream business.
Right.
Is that something you think will continue into as a financial guy?
Yes.
Where do you see that model going?
Yes, so master limited partnerships, ours is PSXP, Phillips 66 Partners, and we've used it to help grow our midstream business. The MLP was initially started with incentive distribution rights, which as you grow the distributions of the MLP, the general partner takes more and more of the distributions. And once you hit the high splits, once you've grown to a certain level, 50% of the incremental growth goes to the general partner, who only owns 2%, but has initial or incentive distribution rights to take 50% of the proceeds. This is a structure that has gone out of favor with investors because they don't like that 50% going to the 2% GP. And so many of the MLPs have already, and in fact, a couple of months ago, Phillips 66 converted our IDRs, our incentive distribution rights, to LP units, limited partnership units. And so that puts Phillips 66, that makes our incentives consistent with the LP unit holder views and desires. And so we've eliminated the IDRs, and now we're seeing eye to eye with the LP unit holders. Our MLP has a very high investment grade credit rating. Just earlier this week, we raised debt to replace previous debt at 2.5% to 3%. So very low cost debt. We have the ability to raise equity there in an environment where the equity investors are encouraging growth, which is not really today, but we feel at some point in the future it will be. And so the MLP provides a capital raising entity for us to help grow our midstream business. The other thing it does with our four segments, with the refining, the marketing, the midstream, and the chemicals, investors value us as a sum of the part. And so they look at EBITDA times a refining multiple, midstream times a midstream multiple, chemicals times a chemicals market multiple, and the same for marketing. So this provides transparency, a midstream equity that is publicly available, and you can see it's trading about 12 times EBITDA, and so that helps investors put a multiple on our midstream business, because not all of the midstream is in the MLP. Some of it's still at the parent.
This shows you that it is not only chemical engineering 101 that's important in his business, but it's financial 101. In other words, how you manage the business is extremely important from the financial point of view, not only from the chemical or scientific or transformation point of view. The refining guys are important, but the guys back at home office that know how to run this type of programs are also key to the long-term stability. I think the technical guys on the downstream are more short-term. These guys are more longer-term. They're looking at what's going to happen in the next 6, 12, 18 months, and you get the business ready to take advantage of that situation.
5 years, 10 years.
5 years to 10 years.
We're
yeah.
investing in 30-year assets, so we're looking long-term.
Ken Swift, who is the chief economist for the American Chemistry Council, recently said, and I'm going to quote here, but I think it's important to bring this global business that we're in today. He said, a positive chemical industry outlook depends upon access to abundant and affordable energy. He has it. A strong U.S. manufacturing base, I think is still there. A balanced regulatory environment, which is more or less there. State of the U.S. and global economy, access to global supply chains, and access to export markets. China is turning upside down. The relationship between the U.S. and China certainly is turning things upside down. You're in the Middle East, which is fine because you're close to producers. How do you see this global economy and these controversies that we see today in world trade impacting your long-term strategy?
Yeah, we're optimistic that this is not a long-term problem, that this is more of a short-term problem. We are seeing impacts on our chemical business. Since there's tariffs on U.S. goods going into China, we're taking product out of the Middle East and taking it to China and taking the U.S. Gulf product to other Asian countries. It results in longer routes for the tanking companies, and it's increased shipping cost. It's inefficient. We're hopeful that it's short term, but we think that it's hindered chemical margins by about 15 to 20% lower than what they would have been without the trade wars. We are seeing the trade war impact manufacturing activity. We look at the manufacturing indexes as a leading indicator of manufacturing activity and the health of manufacturing, and we're seeing Germany fall below 50. 50 is the borderline between growth and contraction. And so manufacturing activity is falling in Germany. That's the most important European economy. We're seeing Asia and China falling below 50, so they're in contraction. So the trade wars are significantly impacting manufacturing activity, and it's our view if we don't settle the trade war that we will enter into recession, which will slow demand growth for oil and refined products. And for chemical products, we talked earlier about GDP growth and how chemicals grow faster and products grow more slowly. But we are seeing and are concerned that we need to reach some kind of settlement there to prevent a recession. How does Phillips 66 look at this? We believe that this is a short-term event. So number one, we're focused on owning assets that are low-cost producers. We talked about chemical and our feedstocks being lower than anywhere else in the world. In the U.S., our feedstocks are cheaper than other areas of the world as well. So within refining and chemicals, we're going to make money when others can't. I think the other thing is it's important to keep a very strong high investment grade credit because there may be times when you need to add debt, and you want to do that when interest rates are cheap. And interest rates are cheap today because the central banks are worried about recession. And so at 26, 27% debt to total cap, we're in much better shape than the rest of our industry, and we've got financial flexibility. We talked about reinvesting 60% and returning 40% to shareholders. During recessionary periods, we tend to cut back our growth capital. And long-term projects, we're going to move forward and build those out. But we have flexibility to reduce our capital spending. We can slow our dividend growth in the event of a recession, of a financial crisis like we saw in 2009. We have the ability to scale back our buybacks. And so there's lots of flexibility in the way we manage our capital and manage our balance sheet to survive and even benefit from recessionary periods. So those are things that we manage to get through these type of events.
You know, if you're a low-cost producer and you're an efficient producer, you can manage the cycles, which is what he's talking about. You're not going to avoid the cycles. But again, if your core business is managing that business, you can go through those cycle periods. One thing about chemicals, look around this room. The carpet, the chairs, I'm sure those walls, everything is based on plastic, everything is chemicals. That's his business. So we always think of the oil industry as gasoline or diesel and jet fuel. And we always tend to forget that a big portion of our business is really the chemical business. We just don't see it. Just checking your wallets and your purses and you'll see it all around you. So that's a good business to be in. Let me ask one of the questions that, and you brought up the pillars in which Phillips is based on. And today, there's a group or a new movement from investors that is called environmental, social, and governance concerned folks. I don't think that's impacting your business because you already have it on your core and your mission and your values. But is that something that the industry as a whole is looking at today?
Yes.
Those type of investors that are a little more strict of who you are and what you do?
Yes, very much so. We have, if you go to our website, sustainability is front and center on the front page of the website. And we have added a couple of documents a year, every year for the last 3 years, just explaining our policies. We talk about sustainability in all of our board meetings this year. We've had a sustainability discussion. You know, we're looking at providing energy across the world, like we talked earlier, to people that don't have it, to people that are moving into the middle class, that need energy to run their economies, need energy for improving their lifestyles, and we're serious about providing that affordable energy. We're investing in renewable diesel. We have 2 projects in Nevada that are coming on late this year, one late this year, one early next year. We've got a project at our Humber refinery in the UK that takes used cooking oil and converts it into diesel. We've got a project at the Ferndale refinery in the Pacific Northwest where we're looking at adding renewable diesel that could be from a variety of feedstocks, including used cooking oil, which is the lowest carbon intensity, to soybean oil, which is still fairly carbon intensive, and tallow, and a number of products in between. And so we're looking at increasing our renewable diesel production. We are the largest producer of needle coke. Needle coke is a key ingredient for lithium-ion batteries. So for those of you that are carrying around one of these, you have Phillips 66 Humber Coke in every cell phone. And so lithium-ion batteries that are being utilized for electric vehicles, we're the primary producer of the needle coke that goes into those batteries. So we're focused on participating in low carbon fuels and growing our footprint there. There's one other one that I've forgotten. So it's renewable diesel. Oh, thank you. We are the only refinery that has our own technology center. And in that technology center, we've identified a photovoltaic that is nearing being economic. And so we're pushing forward with that and hoping to commercialize that in the near future.
One of the things that most folks forget, and Dave Tuttle is here, so he's going to correct me if I'm wrong, is that in our business, fossil fuels, hydrocarbons, less than 2% goes to the electric power sector. So you can build all the wind turbines and solar that you want. You're not going to reduce the consumption of gasoline. 85% of our business really is the transportation sector. That's where the industry is focused on. And one of the ways that we can do it is really by working with the automotive industry for more efficient engines, but also the quality of the fuel. The quality of the fuel is extremely important. The rest is up to you guys. Because you're also part of the equation.
Yeah, I think as you look at global energy, all types, about 85% of it is fossil fuels. And the wind and solar businesses are growth industries. They're going to continue to grow. They've grown rapidly. Really, you look back in the 1980s is really when wind energy came in, late 80s, 90s, solar energy came in. The cost curve for solar and wind energy came down exponentially for a number of years. And now it's starting to flatten out. It's still improving. The cost of wind and solar is still going down. There's huge growth opportunities for wind and solar. But if you look at the U.S., from 1980 till today, wind and solar represent about 3 to 4% of power generation in the U.S. And so as you look at it, natural gas has grown very rapidly, and coal-fired generation has declined. And that's really, you look at emissions in the U.S., and they've declined, and the main reason they've declined is because we shut coal plant and mainly replaced it with gas-fired generation. And so in the U.S., emissions are declining.
Natural gas is that bridging fuel that you see now all over the world, whether it is to replace coal or in some places, by the way, hydro. We have Brazil and China as the two largest hydro producers in the world. Well, we tend to forget about global warming and drought periods. And both Brazil and Venezuela had to rely on gas because during periods of drought, the hydroelectric production went way down. So you're right, natural gas to me is a key fuel for the next 20, 25 years. We're a major exporter now, the U.S., of LNG.
Right.
Natural gas is one of those fuels.
The wind and the sun tend to shine during the day, and natural gas
you need that base load.
Can burn.
Yeah. By the way, any questions, guys? Come on. I mean, don't, be sure to raise your hand and interrupt.
Yeah, we hadn't had any problem talking.
Yeah, we go.
Yes, Luis.
Jeff, do you mind sharing an insight of how the refining industry was 10, 15 years ago from a capital discipline to nowadays, and a little bit on the consolidation, how management's looking at the business right now in the U.S. versus 10, 15 years ago?
Yeah, I think if you go back to the 1980s and 1990s, there was substantial excess capacity, refining excess capacity. And so margins went basically to cash operating costs, and it was an extremely difficult period for refining. As part of the super major consolidation that we talked about earlier, the super majors in large part sold refining capacity, and they sold it to the independents. And the major integrateds went from owning 75 or 80% of U.S. refining capacity, and now the independents own over 60% of the U.S. refining capacity. And this started in the early 2000s. And so the refiners started running refineries to make money as opposed to a way to monetize their oil production. And so for the integrated oil companies, it was kind of a lost leader getting oil to the market as gasoline, diesel, jet. And so now the vast majority of the refineries in the U.S. are run for profitability, not just to upgrade.
You have
crude.
Phillips, you have Marathon, Valero. Those are the three biggest, right?
Yeah, PBF, Holly Frontier.
Holly Frontier.
Yeah, our other independents. And so that has been a change. The other thing that the independents realized is that the market just wasn't growing that rapidly. And so the refiners across the board, Marathon, Valero, Phillips 66, all are returning large percentage of their free cash flow to shareholders instead of building more capacity. And so that has resulted in a much more disciplined industry that has been much more profitable.
They have a business sense more than I think that the all upstream companies. And you guys really, well, the 3 or 4 or 5 super majors today in the downstream business really are flexible. They're traders. They're looking for that advantage. They really manage that margin well, and they're doing good business. There was another hand up here.
Question, yeah?
And you also have a 30-year, you're investing 30 years ahead in certain assets. I'm wondering if you have invested in any sort of solar or wind farm capabilities moving towards clean energy.
So they're small. We have some investments where they make sense. I think there are a lot of opportunities for wind and solar in isolated situations where it makes sense. We have invested in cogeneration, which makes steam and electricity from natural gas, and the steam is utilized in oil field recovery, in heat, in refineries, and the electricity. In many of our refineries, we provide a lot of our own electricity that's cleaner and lower cost than the grid. Question in the back?
There's also the question whether, and this is me now talking out loud, Jeff, you don't have to answer, whether an oil company really has to be in the solar or wind business. I mean, are they doing it because it just looks good and it helps you, your image, or is it because it's a good business? You either are into a business because it's a business and you're making a margin, and that's your focus, or you're not. And I'd rather see the investment that I do in an oil company to make an oil company more efficient and cleaner from the process, manufacturing, and what they do from their core business. If a company comes to me and says, I'm a fossil fuel company, but I have this beautiful, nice solar plant somewhere out, really, so think about that too. Yes.
So we're looking for opportunities where it's economic to make those investments, and we're investing there. There are also schemes set up to where you can get economic credits, and in some instances we're investing to generate renewable diesel, for example, where we get credits for that, and there are subsidies supporting wind, solar, renewable diesel, a number of the renewable fuels.
Like there? Where? Okay.
Hello, thank you for this lecture, first of all. I'm a master's student at the law faculty, and I had a practice in law where I had chance to see dispute resolution part of energy-related disputes. And I was wondering, as you mentioned earlier, you have pipeline projects, and I was wondering how the routes for these pipelines are determined, because sometimes there are discussions about the routes, but I was wondering about the factors or rationales behind determining the routes for these pipelines from your perspective.
Yes. So, Julie, do you want to take that? I mean, I'm happy to, but it's... So let me answer, and then Julie can correct me if I'm wrong. So the U.S. Corps of Engineers has standards that we meet and exceed on all of our pipeline construction projects. When we have a project, we are going out in the communities, we meet with the local cities, states, counties, and talk through our plans to build pipelines. We always have multiple routes that we're considering, depending on things that may come up, so that we have alternative routes. And so it's very important to us to meet with communities. In the vast majority of the cases, the communities are encouraging the employment, they're encouraging the commerce, and so we have been successful building many pipelines, and so, but we have policies and procedures in place to ensure that we exceed all the requirements that state and federal governments have in place.
The only thing I can add to that is I know a lot of our pipeline construction projects try to stay within existing pipeline corridors.
Right.
Rather than going off into other areas where there's already existing corridor and the right-of-ways are easier to manage that way.
And these corridors are not only in liquids or oil pipeline. You also have electric transmissions and the railroads. So they are these highways, we don't see them, but they're these right-of-way highways that we all take advantage of whenever we can. But at the end of the day, it's economics, but we do have to certainly take in mind local communities, the environment, ecology, and so on, which we all do. So.
Sure.
Keep saying we all do because I'm still.
Thanks. So you mentioned that you guys have pipelines in the Permian dealing with oil and natural gas liquids, but there's a bunch of gas being flared there, something like 1 BCF per day. And I was wondering if there's any incentive for the midstream companies to either expand the network or build capacity for that gas.
Yes, great question. One of our joint ventures is DCP, and DCP is a partner in the Gulf Coast project that Kinder Morgan is scheduled to start up at the end of the year, and so that natural gas pipeline is being constructed and will start up. It's anticipated that will not be enough. I think it was obvious, the crude growth and the NGL supply growth, the associated natural gas, and so the engineers in here can tell you that anytime you produce oil, you typically get other products with it. And so there's associated natural gas that gets produced with the oil. It's a smaller percentage. The oil is far and away driving the economics of the production and the drilling activity. At one point, when there wasn't enough natural gas pipeline capacity, natural gas actually traded at a loss in the Permian Basin. And so Kinder Morgan is the biggest pipeline company that's adding capacity. They've got a second major. The first pipe is 2 BCF a day. They've got a second 2 BCF a day, and they're considering a third BCF a day pipeline. And so that issue is being addressed, but it will take some time. The challenge is production typically grows in a straight line, and pipeline projects are lumpy, and they come on. And so there are pipelines on the way. But that's going to continue to be a pipeline. There'll continue to be a pipeline problem there. I think the amount of flared gas should decline substantially when this second pipe starts up. But there's need for an additional third pipeline, we think.
Most of that gas is also associated gas. The wet gas is what producers are going after because of the high content of the NGLs.
Right.
So it's how to manage either that associated gas, but really very few producers, I think, are really going after natural gas fields themselves. I don't think that's one of their targets. Yes.
Hello. As both a chemical business and a midstream business, how do you view the lifting of the oil export ban in the United States in 2015? I mean, since that might increase the price of natural gas and oil in the future, and you're both transporting gas outside, so making money out of that, but that might increase the price of.
Yes, that's a great question. That's a great question. You're right. In 2015, the U.S. government eliminated the crude export ban, and what we were seeing prior, when there was an export ban, is that the industry was adding refining capacity and refining the crude in the U.S. and then exporting products. And after the elimination of the export ban, it really made sense, given the quality of the crude. It's light, it's sweet, it's easy to refine. There's excess refining capacity, sweet, low complexity refining capacity internationally. And so it really made sense to export the crude rather than to process it here. We've seen, natural gas, we've been able to export. Prior to that, there was no ban on exporting natural gas. So LNG has grown as a business. What it has allowed us to do is increase U.S. exports. It's improved the trade balance for the U.S. Substantially. As we mentioned earlier, we're now net exporters of petroleum products, which has allowed the U.S. energy business to grow substantially faster and substantially larger than it would have if that ban were still in place.
We're exporting 1 million barrels a day of refined products to Mexico. 1 million barrels a day of exports from PADD 3, from the Gulf Coast, to Mexico. Then today, one of the largest producers in Latin America is no longer Venezuela. It is Brazil. Brazil today is producing 2.7 million barrels a day. Brazil is importing refined products from the U.S. So even though they have the production, the crude oil production, they don't have the refinery capacity, and most important, they don't have the conversion for clean fuels. So those are countries that internally, if you look at the Paris 21 agreement, that are trying to achieve certain clean fuels specs, they can't. Even though they have the refinery capacity, they don't have the desulfurization capacity. We do. You do. So that's a fantastic business to be in. Who's, and then up here.
Thank you for a great seminar. So I'm a kind of process engineer in Japan and for oil and gas field. And please correct me if my understanding is wrong. I remember that there are more than 100 delayed coker in the U.S. And then by 2008, the U.S. imports a lot of heavy crude oil from Canada bitumen. And however, after the shale gas and oil boom, most of the project in Canada was suspended, and because the U.S. now an exporter of the crude oil. And I wonder if that in a situation where there are many of delayed coker in the USA, how the capacity of delayed coker can be maintained. I mean, I understand that capacity of the delayed coker is decreasing, and then, so my question is related to the previous one, because you kindly said that millions of crude oil exported to Mexico. However, as a country like Qatar or Middle Eastern country invest on condensate projects so that the condensate and lighter crude oil could be converted into a chemical product. I wonder how do you see the future's refinery business in the USA?
Okay. I want to try to hit that, and if I don't catch everything, let me know. the Canadian, there's substantial resource there, and projects have slowed mainly because of lack of new pipeline capacity out of Canada. And so there's substantial resource there. We're supportive of incremental pipeline capacity. We're the largest importer. Phillips 66 is the largest importer of Canadian crudes, and so we benefit from those heavy crudes. We bring them in.
It used to be a Venezuelan crude too, at one time.
Yes, and so we're bringing those crudes into the central U.S., the mid-continent. We're bringing some of those crudes down in the Gulf Coast as well. With the oversupply of crude, OPEC has cut 1.5 million barrels a day of crude. Those are predominantly medium and heavy barrels. Iran is under sanctions. There's over 1 million barrels a day reduction in heavy barrels coming out of Iran. Venezuela's lost over 2 million barrels a day. That's all heavy crudes. And so the loss, and we think the OPEC crudes certainly are temporary losses. Those barrels we think are going to come back into the market. It doesn't appear imminent that the Iranian sanctions are going to get settled, but at some point they will, and those heavy barrels are going to come back into the market. Venezuela, we think, is going to be a more challenging situation to where once they recover and start to recover, it's going to be a long haul raising that production back up. So that's going to take time. When you look at deep water, a lot of the deep water are medium and heavy barrels. So if you think about what's going to happen for the next 6 to 12 months, there's a lot of heavy barrels off the market. If you think what's going to happen over the next 10 years, 20 years, then heavy barrels are going to come back into the market, and we're going to need to fill those cokers back up. And so it's a short-term versus a long-term story. But we see the need for that upgrading, for the coking, for the hydrocracking in particular, even for cat cracking, but for coking and hydrocracking, we see a bright future for those units in particular. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
Hi, thank you for being here. I have a question around the marine fuels that you mentioned and the levels of sulfur that are in those. And this is a field I'm completely unfamiliar with, and I'm just curious because you mentioned today. My first question is kind of a three-parter, but I think a lot of them are easy. The first one, you said the new levels of sulfur in those fuels are going to change as of January 1. So my question is this a new regulation, or is this a decision within Phillips?
It's a new regulation. Thanks for asking that. It's an industry-wide regulation, not just Phillips 66.
Awesome. And then my second question to that is, what organization regulates that level of sulfur?
Yeah, it's the International Marine Organization. You hear it called the IMO.
Awesome.
And IMO 2020 is the International Marine Organization's implementation of the tighter fuel specifications for marine fuels.
And it's been a process that's been on the pipeline for many, many years. I
Right.
mean, that was, changing from 3.5 sulfur bunker to 0.5 bunkers is not something that you do overnight, but just changing a valve. So this has been going on for at least 10, 15 years. But all those cruise ships that we see out there now, in fact, there are cruise ships now going into certain countries and major cities in which the fuel that is being burned on the ship is cleaner than the fuel that is burned on the power plant that is providing energy to that city. So it's quite a dramatic change. Yep.
My final question around that is, so they've gradually brought this reduction, or they've gradually prepared the industry for that sort of reduction, and you said that you think long-term there will be even greater reductions in sulfur levels in the marine fuels. So I'm wondering, is there a reason there wasn't a greater reduction now? Is the technology not quite there? Is it cost issues? Please elaborate.
It's a huge step going from 3.5% sulfur to 0.5% sulfur. So it was a step that the industry viewed it could make and needed to make. And My suspicion is it's not going to be 2 years from now, but 5 years from now, 10 years from now, I think that will come down further. But there will need to be more investment made. And this energy is the industry of long lead times. And the coking units, the hydrocrackers, those are 4 to 5 year lead time construction. So you really need a 10-year visibility in order to implement tighter specifications.
By the way, how many engineers were here, or how many folks from engineering? One of these days, go by Pickle Research Center and go by the research center that the School of Chemical Engineering has. And they have 2 refining units, and they're both thanks to Phillips 66. So if you guys want to see a mini refinery, just go down to Pickle Research Center, and thanks to Phillips, we have 2 of them.
I think while you're on that, another project we have within the mechanical engineering school is a couple of robotics projects that are just kicking off. One is to inspect tanks. Currently, these big major tanks, we send people down in to measure, and we have to have an emergency crew prepared.
Yep.
And we have hundreds of tanks that we inspect annually. So the thought of having a robot that can go down, measure the wall thickness, measure the integrity of the tanks, and not put humans in there is a terrific event. And we're actually piloting these on some of our tanks currently, and we're working with the University of Texas to increase and enhance this technology. So there are a number, you mentioned the distillation towers, and so there are a number of hands-on opportunities that we're trying to work with the University of Texas to enhance and build for the future.
I think we need to wrap it off unless, one more? Okay, one more, and then I'll let Jeff just finish up. And then what I would like Jeff to do afterwards is talk about you guys. What is Phillips 66 looking for? Where is that next generation of engineers and business people, not only for you, but for the industry as a whole? Where are they coming from? And what are you looking for?
Hi, both. Thank you, everybody, for the great discussion here tonight. I wanted to ask, so this is my question. It's kind of along that same train of regulation and maintaining responsive to that. What sort of regulation are you guys anticipating over the next couple of years? And how are you putting in processes and systems to ensure that your business is responsive to these new regulations? Yeah. And perhaps you could give us an insight on an industry level as well. Thank you.
Yeah. That's a good question. We have people, regulatory people in Washington D.C. We participate in API, the American Petroleum Industry Group. We participate in the American Fuels and Chemicals Group. So we're active in many of the industry groups. We talked a little bit about our participation in renewable diesel and moving and investing in those areas. We have been active in working with the CAFE standards and improving fuel economy and working with the auto industry as you look at higher fuel economy. Octane is hugely important. So when you go to the station and you see the 87 octane, the 89 and 91 or 93 octane, we're looking at going to 93 octane, or excuse me, at 96 octane for improved fuel economy in some of the new engines. And so we're assessing. We've got 10-year plans that we have developed that we go through with our board of directors every October. We're deep in that process right now. And so we're active. We're active at an executive leadership level. We're active at the board level in looking at potential changes in regulation and how they may impact our business and how we would intend to react to multiple different options in how we may move forward.
So we talked about the combination of business and technical know-how. Something else that you guys are looking for when you interview and you look for future leaders?
I think as we look for leaders, we talked about our high-performing organization, and that starts with high-performing recruits. And the University of Texas is a critical partnership for us. The university excels in many of the degrees that we're pursuing, and so we're hiring chemical engineers, we're hiring mechanical engineers, electrical and civil engineers, and so those are all degrees that are highly ranked at the University of Texas relative to the U.S. We're hiring finance and accounting, we're hiring MBAs, and so those are all well viewed relative to other schools. The University of Texas is one of our key relationships, one of the top 4 universities that we recruit from. We invest, we've talked about the distillation units and the robotics, and so we invest in the university. And one thing I would mention tomorrow night, Rex Bennett, who was in my role before I started as the UT ELT member, is a UT chemical engineer. He's being inducted into, I want to call it the Chemical Engineering Hall of Fame. That's not the right word. Yep. Thank you. Thank you. And so he's had a 40-year career with Phillips 66 in our industry as a chemical engineer, and he's currently the president of business development for Phillips 66. And so we're honored that he's receiving that recognition tomorrow night. And so excelling in the areas of your expertise. One thing we would say is communication is hugely important. This is a very complex organization and a complex industry, and engineers don't only work with engineers, they're working with the financial people, they're working with legal, they're working with communications, and communications is hugely important. Our culture is built around collaboration, working on teams, working across disciplines. That's one of the reasons I love this class, is because this is real life. And so communications and collaboration is hugely important. And so when you have a team, take it seriously. Get the best out of every team member. And those are things I would emphasize. Angela, anything I've missed?
Hi, the only thing I would add is that we're currently recruiting on campus. So I would encourage you, I met some of you, I've seen familiar faces yesterday at the Business Career Fair. We'll be on campus next week for the Engineering Career Fair, and then the week after that for the Science and Technology Fair. So our jobs are posted on p66oncampus.com. So I know this is very tactical, but it's recruiting season. So I encourage y'all to go out and apply. Hope to meet some of you, and we'll be on campus for interviews towards the end of the month. So that's all I'd add.
Thank you all for
Jeff,
coming,
thank you.
and we appreciate your interest.
Thank you.
Well done, sir.
Thank you.
Yeah.